This must be the place.
This is the place.
Gary, it's such a pleasure and an honor to be here in the company of your work and this exhibition in London. I want to start by going back a little bit in time to when you were first studying and first making work. You studied under artists in New York and in California. You studied under Jack Whitten, another artist in New York. Then you were in grad school in California with John Baldessari, amongst others. Mm-hmm. I'm interested if and in which ways these very singular artists, how they might have shaped your practice or what you might have learned from them at this period in your life.
Wow. I learned everything from them. I wouldn't be sitting here in front of this room of, brilliant people without them. I was fortunate enough to be in undergraduate with Jack Whitten, as you said. In graduate school, I was with Charles Gaines. They not only helped shape me, because I think, the times were very different. We're talking about the mid to late 80s, and there were very few black artists in the spotlight then, like very few. I could count on one hand, probably. In fact, I don't think in undergrad I knew another black artist, period. I looked to Adrian Piper, I looked to David Hammonds, folks like that, and I had the guidance of Jack Whitten to tell me how to navigate that. And Jack was very honest in explaining some of the pitfalls and things that he had to try to get through. And I listened intently to him, and then later on in grad school to Charles, and as you said, Baldessari, and I think Jack was really, he was very clear in looking at me as a young artist and saying that he suggested that I go to California, and I took it personally. Because I'm born in New York. New Yorkers are very covetous of their town, and Jack's not originally from New York. So he said, Gary, you should probably go to California. And I said, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm from New York, man. You don't even belong here. And he said, just relax, man. I'm not trying to tell you you don't belong. I'm trying to tell you that your type of conceptualism is closer to what's going on in California. The Baldessaris, the Catherine Lords, the Michael Ashers, the thinkers that were working out there. And my undergrad experience in New York was mostly, a kind of work ethic, and the conceptualism will follow. Mm-hmm. Even though I was studying with, Joseph Kosuth and folks like that, and it was still a very much like grind it out and make and make and make. And then I got to California, and it was much more the reverse. It was like think first before you make. So it was a very good combination.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm asking the question. What did he define when he said your kind of conceptualism? What did he have in mind? What did you have in mind? What did that phrase, or a phrase similar to that, what did that mean to you as a young artist? What were you seeing in your own work?
I was really drawn to minimalism and conceptualism. I liked the stripped down, nature of minimalism, and how the object related to the architecture, the institution. All of those things spoke to me. I wasn't interested in figuration. I wasn't interested in the personal type of representation. Mm-hmm. I was really more interested in a kind of critique, in a way. But what I needed was, I looked to the minimalists and the conceptualists, and all I saw were older white male artists who I respected and enjoyed their work, but there was no me. I couldn't find me in there. And I think any young male, no matter where you're from, has a certain amount of testosterone and energy and anger and rage and all the rest of those things that you want to kind of get out through your work. And politics was my voice. There was a lot going on in New York and around the world at the time that I thought we needed to address. And so I said, well, how do I find a way to speak my mind through my work in this kind of stripped down reduction kind of way? And it was by combining those, and I looked to David Hammons the most. I think David was and is the master at that. He's somebody that looks for objects and things that people cast off or throw away that are infused with a certain kind of patina, and putting them back together in a sort of casual way and almost reversing the mirror back on society. And he was the guy for me. He combined both. He had a sense of humor. He had a sense of anger. David doesn't take shit from anybody. And he dictates the narrative. And I thought that was something to be respected. And I liked the way that he sort of conducted himself through the art world. That piece that he did with the snowballs is probably my favorite art piece maybe ever. And the mythology that's created around it.
I guess the difference, but so one of the things about Blizz itself, Hammond is present in the work there. He's present in the image, he was present in the act and the performance. You talk about your work as not being necessarily centered on you as a person. So I'm interested in how the process of evolution, I suppose, of your practice. Maybe let's say this simply. When are you painting? And when do those paintings start to resolve in something that feels like, okay, this is the path now?
That's a tough question to answer precisely, because I think I specifically take the me out of it from the jump. I think that I'm looking at the we, not the me. I'm looking at creating avenues of access for a viewer's experience in their own histories. So I think one of the keys is that you can't get up on a soapbox and kind of lecture. Nobody's going to listen to that. I think that a conversation is the way to do it. And I learned early on that, the work, when I was really young, coming out of school, the work wasn't traveling and being processed the way that I was thinking about it in the studio. And I would go to Europe, I would show in Paris, and it would be sort of pigeonholed into this American experience, oh, that's your problem you all have. And I was like, wait, hang on, this is not just a New York, like a American experience. This is like an all of us experience. And, there's black folks in Africa, there's black folks in, Italy, and, all over the world that are experiencing this. So how do I do that? How do I create those streets and avenues for people to enter the work and move around in their own terms? Not be congested and restricted by certain kind of boundaries or those kinds of things.
I mean, look, we're in the presence here, as it were, of one of the singular kind of recurring, a number of recurring motifs, but the crows.
Yeah.
Let's think about the crows. The crows have been there. First things first. When did you come to the crows as a figure? Where are we?
We are in probably 1989. I think I was getting out of school or somewhere around grad school, and I was trying to do a film. And I'm a research nerd. I love to, if it's about whatever it's about, I'm gonna research it to death. And I was trying to make a film. The basis was education, and I needed to find an image to latch onto, and a genre that I could, kind of drill down into and explore it. And I thought, well, what is the first images that a child is seeing? And I thought, I'm a kid of working class, blue collar kind of thing, typical West Indian parents that have 2 and 3 jobs. And, the joke is how many jobs do you have? And, your parents kind of sit you down in front of the television and off you go. And cartoons are the thing where you start to watch. But I realized that I was processing cartoons differently than some of my peers. So I thought, well, what are the most educational cartoons that are out there? And Disney is one that is so loaded that most people have, the characters are very lovable and, they're funny and all of this. But there's a insidious, violent undertone to a lot of Disney characters. And I started to look at, I thought, well, Dumbo is the obvious choice, because Dumbo is, here's this little elephant that's born, and he discovers that he has these enormous ears. He gets, ridiculed for it. And these black figures, these crows, teach him to take something that's perceived as a negative and turn it into a positive, and he flies through the movie, and it's all very cute. But through discussing this with other people, people would say, well, what are you working on? And I'd say, well, I'm working on this film, Dumbo, and I realized that Dumbo was being remembered along racial lines. And white folks weren't remembering these crows. And that was almost the only thing I remembered from these cartoons. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. How could a cartoon from our past be so nostalgic and so iconic and so, break down in these two places? And the crows are the reason why Dumbo learns to fly. And they're very step and fetch it, and they're very, stereotypical, and, they're naughty crows, and this whole thing. Come to find out years later, in the past 5 or 6 years, they've tried to actually erase the crows from the cartoon. So there's an outcry of, you can't alter this cartoon. So that's a debate of a different kind. But I was fascinated by this idea that they were, remembered by different groups.
The crows enter your lexicon.
Yeah, that's when the crows entered.
And this is the Hammond's approach.
Yeah.
This is humor, this is anger, this is politics, also poised in such an interesting way to draw them out, to create space around them so that we can start to look at them and think through exactly this whole process that you've just described there. And they've never left.
They've never left. And the spirit of them has never left. I think that crows over time they continue to represent or become stand-ins for black folks.
Yeah.
And, these crows are, I specifically painted them with a kind of a blue-black sort of paint. So at a certain angle, you'll pick up the blue highlights on them, and then in other angles, it turns into a flat black. So they do rear their heads all the time. They're these mischievous creatures that pop up all the time. They haunt the Hitchcock movie, The Birds, where there's that scene where they're tiptoeing past the schoolyard, and the crows are, sitting on all the gym equipment and things. Yeah. That's a terrifying, that movie, that scene is, there's probably 2 scenes in movies that affected me from childhood that I can legitimately say those 2 moments were why I'm an artist. There's the moment in The Wizard of Oz when the house drops and she opens the door. It's a sepia screen at the moment in the interior of the house. She opens the door and Oz is there, and the music sort of comes up and it's and I saw it, and I was probably 6 years old, and I remember watching this in my cousin's basement, and my mother was behind me, and I looked at her and I said, I want to do that. And it was that moment where the color is so saturated, and it's Technicolor, and this is early 70s. So for me, I was, it was on one of those big box TVs that nobody uses anymore. But so there's that, and then there's the birds. The birds was another one where we watched it collectively as a family, and I remember my mother being kind of nervous to let us watch this movie because, and I said, no, I got it, I'm cool. It's just a movie, and that movie scared the hell out of me, man. I had horrible dreams for a week. I was sleeping in my mother's bed. It was a nightmare, and I couldn't look at birds the same, And to this day, I look at crows, and I still kind of get a little, they're really big, and they're really haunting, and they kind of look. There's the raven from. So historically, there's a lot of fear around the crow. And fear that puts it in the service of being the other, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I think the crow is so attached to blackness through history.
I want to stick with that for a moment because in the reading of the crow, for you now, does this figure represent exclusively miscreants and othering, and it's a question or is there space for a kind of Henry Louis Gates tricksterish reading of the crow as a signifier of doublespeak?
It's funny that you bring up Skip Gates. I think it hovers between both. I think, just like it does historically, I think that you can't pin down, and I don't want my works to be pinned down. Yeah. I think that's the reason why they're created the way that they are, is that they're in a state of becoming. They're becoming one thing and leaving another.
So they look semi-formed in a way.
Exactly, and that's intentional. Yeah. I mean, I want the viewer to kind of complete those pieces, those bits that kind of define what it is. Yeah. And I think that to answer your question, it's the same thing. It kind of hovers between two places. And the work exists between representation and abstraction.
Yes.
And that blurry place is left open-ended for the viewer to kind of connect the dots and finish the lines and redefine what you're looking at.
I mean, let's talk about your technique of erasure. We see that in the paintings that we have here. Think about the legacies of erasure in art history. Rauschenberg erased de Kooning drawing. Andy Warhol smeared silkscreens. Even Francis Bacon. It's kind of ghostly, blurring, bring to it. It's interesting you bring these historical illusions, and we're also interrogating these questions of race and presence and identity and vanishing and erasure. Yeah. It's all there.
Yeah, I think the history of what's interesting about the artists that you just mentioned, from Bacon to Warhol and to the de Kooning, Rauschenberg, is that those are all white males. Exactly. Those are all those are artists that are using it as a strategy and a gesture in a very mechanical sort of way. I think what's the same conversation, but brings it to another place, is that there's a politic infused in this erasure. Yeah. I think that erasure for Black folks is something that is a deep trauma that we work with historically. Our history is completely lost for the most part, and is pieced together by, it's a kind of vocal history, right? It's passed on from one to another. Even in a similar way, I like to compare it to cooking. I love to cook. But I would sit next to my grandmother and try to figure out how she would do saltfish and ackee, and I can't replicate that. I can't. But I'd say, well, Grandma, what are you doing there? What do you, sweetie, you just take a little pinch of this and you put it in there, and you know when it's right. I don't fucking know when it's right. How do I know that? And I've sat next to her a million times. But that's the way that we, it's a kind of history that's passed down from one to the other.
It had to be. African American history de facto is oral because black people weren't allowed to read.
Weren't allowed to read
weren't
or
allowed
write.
to write.
Right.
Weren't allowed
so
to know their
it was
own
a secret,
names.
So I think that it's one of those things, and there's slippages, right? So we have to fill in the gaps, and to maintain a certain sense of identity and pride and history and all the rest of those things, we tend to like to embellish certain places, and we love the idea that we all come from kings and queens. That would be great, except that would be, everybody would be kings and queens in this room.
Yeah.
But there's an empowerment to it, right? And so you kind of, no actual memory is a true memory. There are gaps that are filled. And there's a moment where there's a photograph from my childhood, me and my sister. My sister's in a diaper. I'm in one of those little pedal cars, and it's a very sweet picture from like the '60s or something. And my grandmother must have told me about this very moment, that's in this photograph so many times that photograph has become my memory. I actually think that I remember that moment. And it's all told through her filter. So now I tell my own daughter the same story of a photograph that I saw that my grandmother told me that it's impossible for me to remember that moment. But it's important for me to know that I recreated that, and also hang on to it as a kind of way of passing on histories. And I think we do that as a culture. And, we do it out of necessity.
Is erasure the right word then? Think, because erasure, blurring, movement, motion, a reach into memory, there's a number of things going on here. But conventionally, we might say, well, yes, this is in the lineage of erasure and so on. But is that actually accurate?
It's a good question, because I think erasure implies a certain kind of intent, right? And really, we're not looking for intent. We're looking to almost recapture. I think it comes out of erasure because a lot of the work is drawn from stereotypes that I'm trying to erase.
Yes.
And there's traces and ghosts and haunting that exists. That sense of a space being haunted is fascinating to me. That there's these histories to a room, to a building. And I was in a building yesterday that had this incredible history to it, this rich history to it. And you could almost feel the ghosts moving through the space because it has to. There's too many years have passed, too many bodies have moved through there, too many experiences were had, that space isn't in some way haunted. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Sometimes it's a good way, but it's a patina that's there. And I think it's one of those things when we look at something, an antique, that you look at this and what makes it a legitimate antique for you to believe is the fact that it had this previous life. And that's what you're buying. You're not necessarily buying the object per se, but you're also buying with it the belief that there's this other life to it. And I'm now taking it, preserving it, and carrying it on and passing it on to a friend.
get back. The 1990s, for you, this is an interesting period. So I think you're in a number of shows in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Amongst others, let's say Black Male. Whitney, curated by Thelma Golden. That's in '94. There's another, you're in a body of shows, and there's a number of other artists.
Eye of the Storm.
Yeah, that are emerging and coming to visibility at the same time. Glenn Ligon, Lorna Simpson, generation of artists that you're part of. We go back to that time and think about what is that process, what is that experience like, what do you feel you're saying, what do you feel you're exploring? You just describe for you this time.
It's a great time to be making work. I think a lot of things came together that had no planning whatsoever. It was just the art gods put this moment together. I mean, I think that you have to remember that in the late 80s, there was a massive art crash, financial crash. The bottom fell out of the art world. There are generations probably even sitting in this room that have never seen an art crash financially in the art world, where nothing is being sold. Everything, the value in the auction rooms just plummeted. Collectors were dumping all of their collection onto the auction rooms, and nobody was buying. Imagine that. Imagine, I can't pick an artist, just randomly select an artist and think that here's this person, and he or she is at the top of their game. Big money for the time, huge money, millionaire stuff happening. There's a handful of collectors that are out there. Now there's hundreds, thousands of collectors now. But then there was, you could probably count them. And suddenly you woke up Monday morning, it followed a financial crash on Friday, right? And so Monday morning, everybody's like, holy shit, I gotta get rid of all this art stuff. And so they take somebody like, I'm not gonna say a name and target him and put it on blast, but you take that artist and all of a sudden, all those collectors just dumped it at Sotheby's. And there's nobody, it's just crickets in the room. Where it comes up, not a hand in the room. Is that a room? No. And suddenly that career is just gone, just down in flames. All those guys. This is like all those guys. So there was nobody exchanging work. People were sitting at desks in galleries like there was nobody coming in. The only people that were coming in were other artists. And I'm telling you the story as if it's like, your grandfather on the thing, but this is true. And it used to happen every 6 years without fail, like just to correct itself. Once we started getting a little hysterical with the numbers, it would be like, oh, we gotta recalibrate. So at that point, this was probably one of the bigger crashes. And everybody was in a crisis, galleries were closing, all the rest of this stuff. So along comes this moment. And you have all these artists of color who weren't making any money anyway. I mean, we weren't one of those making the big money. And we were young and hungry and eager and willing. And, people would say, well, I can't ship any work because I can't afford it. And suddenly my phone would start ringing. It'd be like, hey, aren't you that guy that does drawings on the wall? And I was like, yeah, give me some paint. I'll bring my chalk and I'll put a show together for you. So I'd paint all these walls black and, blast out this incredible show that you suddenly, and then, well, hey, art's still moving forward, because that's the thing that was so brilliant about being a part of what we do. It's not like any other field of creativity. We are the most resilient. No matter what happens, artists will, maybe we're like roaches, I don't know, but we survive. We find a way to make, those are the moments where you're an actual artist. I mean, a real artist is somebody that can put these objects together reconfigure them, recontextualize them for you, and make a piece that's going to be engaging and everybody's going to come up and walk around this thing. It's not dependent on a really great fabricator that's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not about having some fabulous room to put it in, although this is really great. It's the person that can actually take all the trash that's left behind and reconfigure it and show us something new, something from the other side of the mirror. That's the magic. Those are the artists, not the guys that can pay for somebody else to make something.
What do you think what were you looking at and interested in? If we describe this, fine, in financial terms, it's a time of crisis, but what is it you were seeing at this point? What is it you were keen and hungry and eager?
I was seeing a lot of people dying from AIDS, a lot of friends. I was seeing a government that wasn't paying any attention to them because they were disposable figures. I was seeing police brutality on the streets and nobody paying attention to it, and there was no social media, so you couldn't just put that on blast. This is, you'd hear Michael Stewart got his head beat in a subway, for tagging the train. And it would be on like page 3 in the newspaper, somewhere tucked down there, and meanwhile it's like all these cops beat the hell out of this guy. George Floyd happened many times over and over and over before there was a social media to put it out there. And as a young person, male, female, whatever, didn't matter, your choices, you saw that and you felt you were unheard. So we had these walls. And for me, the beauty of doing wall drawings and why I still continue to do them is that they have this, not only are they part of the institution that they're drawn on, it indicts the institution into what the politics is of that drawing. It includes you. It points a finger at it.
So at that moment then, the act of erasure or blurring or whatever we call it, then this too becomes important, because that act of smearing and, again, whatever terms you want, you can call it defacement, all of these things becomes symbolic or emblematic of the experience of the black person.
Mm-hmm. And, and you started to see it everywhere, It's like, hey, hang on, man, I'm not alone, like Glenn's doing it, and Lorna's doing it, and, and then there were these groups, like you had ACT UP was doing their thing, and you had another group called Godzilla, which are a group of politically active Asian artists, and they were doing it. And you had all these groups, you had group material, you had all of these people that were starting to, I don't want to say rise up, but you started to see them more on the walls, on those empty walls.
So did you feel, yes, you are at least gathered together in some of these shows, you're gathered together by different curators, different institutions. Did you feel yourselves part of a group? Did you feel, or at least, did you feel yourself in conversation?
Conversation. Yeah. I think that some of it was pure luck. I mean, I met Thelma. I was going into the new museum and she was leaving the museum. And at the time, I had dreadlocks down to my lower back, and she said, "Are you Gary?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I really want to come to your studio." I was like, "Who are you?" And she said, "I'm Thelma." And at that time, I think she was still working at Queen's Museum. Mm-hmm. And we were puppies. We were, imagine like a box of puppies. And they're all going in different directions. They're all super excited and enthusiastic and peeing on the floor and doing all this stuff. And, that's really who we were. We were just a bunch of puppies. Somebody let the side down and all puppies went running around. And Thelma saw something. Yeah. And there was this moment of Greg Tate
So Greg Tate, great
who
journalist,
was a very
cultural
close friend,
critic.
who I loved dearly. Tate had a way of sizing up situations and rooms and people, and Tate was our griot. Tate was like, so there was Tate, there was Thelma, and then suddenly, like I was hanging out with a lot of the kind of rap poets and people like young kids like that. And so there was this huge movement moving from, because we talked a little bit before that like De La Soul was popular, and they were changing the perception of rap music. And so there was a lot of this like poetry going on, and I was drawn to that. And so those guys became part of our, cipher. So we had these kind of rap poets. We had, writers like Tate. And this wasn't a planned thing. It was, at one point we did put a name on it. We had this loose name where we would actually meet. Because it became too, I don't even remember the name. I remember at one point it was Subway or something. I can't remember the name of what it was, but it was, we did have a kind of name. You started to notice that like there's this crossover of all these people. And Tate was one of those people. Tate would start to write about it in, Vibe magazine, and so we had like Scott Poulsen Bryant was the editor at large of Vibe when it came out, and Dream Hampton was a big writer, and we were all kind of friends anyway. And then we kind of got together, and then suddenly we started going to each other's events. And there was this, but it wasn't planned. It was just kind of, wow, this is awesome. There's a whole bunch of black people in this room.
I'm right here. It felt like, look, popular culture terms, let's say this, you have the music as you've been describing it, the native tongues, De La Soul, Tribe, these artists. You have some spoken word poets. You have filmmakers, you have Spike Lee, people, you have fashion designers like Willie Smith. Now, am I right? It feels a little bit that the visual artists came slightly later in there. Maybe it didn't feel like that at the time, but from a distance, felt like you could see this evolution. And then it was in the early to mid 90s that you saw the artists come into the fore. But I mean, is that accurate or not?
I think it was. I think that because I think music and fashion, you talked about Willie and some of the bands and groups and things. I think those guys really had the public eye, but I think that the visual artists were doing their thing. I just don't think that in the broader sense until the magazine folks started, bringing it up as reference points and things like that. I think the theorists, there were also a lot of academics. You have to remember, there was Tracy Rose and Trisha Rose, excuse me.
Yeah. Trisha Rose, Bell Hooks.
Trisha Rose, Andrew Ross, Stuart Hall, of course, is the god of theory in a way, and so there was starting to be, even in those conversations, we're starting to become part of this thing. That's when you knew you were legit. It was like, oh wow, this is crazy. Like that's Stuart Hall sitting over there at my opening. Like that's pretty impressive.
It's absolute confluence: politics, pop culture, art, theory, all of these things coming together. Now, we've got a few minutes and then I'm going to open up questions from the audience. I want to ask one question, sticking with music for a moment. Mm-hmm. Look, this show is called This Must Be the Place. This painting, I think, is called Small Town Boy.
Yeah.
There's other works in here called, there's another work, How Soon Is Now. There's a theme here.
Yeah.
Theme, early 80s, mid 80s, post-punk, British, US. What's going
on? Music is a huge part of how I produce work. I think if it's not right after I turn the lights on, it's before I turn the lights on. There's some point in there. That's what sets the tone for the studio. So I'll walk in, and it might be Miles Davis Day, and the folks that work for me know, oh, okay, he's in that mood. Or it'll be Eric B. and Rock Him, and they know that there's going to be a whole lot of erasure going on that day.
But the thing is, though, that's jazz, that's hip hop. This is like, it's kind of white post-punk. Like, it's part of that homage because we're in Britain, that we got Bronski Beat and the Smiths.
I love Bronski. I think I was listening to a lot of Bronski Beat when I first started stretching up some of these canvases. I loved Bronski Beat. And don't forget, any DJ worth his salt uses all of that music in their crates. If you don't use that music, then you're a shit DJ. Because that's a really great period of music, and it's anything from Kraftwerk to Depeche Mode and all of that. There are samples and songs and all kinds of stuff that hip hop is based on, that comes out of. And if you don't know that stuff, then you don't know anything about hip hop music, because that's where everything came out of all those songs. When we were crate diving, those are the songs that you looked for, and you were in the clubs and you heard, that high voice, Bronski beat. You're like, what is that? Where does he get that?
And it's still electronic.
And I saw Bronski beat in Danceteria in like 1980 something, and they were amazing, and so they had a huge impact on me. And I think that in this show, I listened to a lot of Depeche Mode anyway. I think there's something very haunting about Depeche Mode that has survived time. It's not stuck. They're a band that's not stuck in a moment. But on any given day, if you came to my studio, I opened the door, I could be listening to Johnny Cash. Yeah, like Johnny Cash. I could be listening to Patsy Cline. It's, I'm not embedded in one genre of music. I'm not going to lie, probably the most I listen to is probably dub and reggae. So you'll hear King Tubby, you'll hear Dennis Brown, you'll hear that kind of thing, but you'll hear that even from the street. If you hear do 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 do, you know what's going on in that end of the building. But at the same time, I'll put on, Billie Eilish and listen to that. I'm a music head. I love it. And I think if you really love music, you're not going to limit yourself to one.
Now, one last question, and then I'm going to open up to the audience. So next month, your first comprehensive institutional survey opens at MCA Chicago.
Yeah.
Gary Simmons, Public Enemy.
Yeah.
What's the experience of it? It hasn't opened, but you've been working on the show. What's the experience for you of being obliged, as it were, to look back over your career? How does that feel as an experience?
It's an honor to get this far. I didn't think at any point, because you don't think, oh yeah, 30 years from now I'm still going to be, at least then, it didn't, it was, I think that's why when you look at that show and you look at that catalog, you'll see very, provocative, dare I say, dangerous pieces in some of the early 90s that were being produced. And I think that, as a young artist, you want to make these big statements. You want to be heard. So you're gonna slap you pretty hard in the face.
Let's look back at something like Garden of Hate. Is that specific to you at a point in time? Does this still feel like, okay, look, could you make that piece now?
Don't know. I think, Thelma, that was the thing about our friendship, all along. Thelma believed in each other, right? And so she, I would tell you that, first of all, when I came, she said she wanted to do an installation. And she said, you can do anything you want. I said, really, anything? Anything? You sure? And she's like, yeah. So I had this garden idea, and I knew it was going to be charged. And describe the work. Basically, it's a big sort of planter that you would find in any town, anywhere, kind of USA. It's a brick planter about this high, and it has these beautiful begonias in red and white that are stunningly beautiful. They're electric, because we set the lights and all of this stuff. But at a certain point, you realize that it reveals the badge of the Ku Klux Klan. And it really sneaks up on you. There's also a flagpole, this big white flagpole with no flag on it, and just an eagle on the top. So it looks like a town hall garden outside of a library or something like that. It's a real indictment of Americana. And, it kicked up a lot of dust. When I came up with it, I told Thelma the idea, and she was like, "This is going to be great." I had zero idea of what I was doing with gardens and flowers. I mean, I literally left that meeting and I ran to a horticulturist and said, "Hey, listen, I have this idea. Can you help me out? I already told this woman that I know what the hell I'm doing." And I think Phil knew that I didn't know a damn thing, but she knew that I'd get it right. And we did it together, and it kicked up dirt. We had a quick story was we did a film series called, and had a film at the time called Blood in the Face. And Blood in the Face is this documentary where this guy secretly went into the Ku Klux Klan and filmed inner meetings of the Klan without them knowing. And we screened it, at the museum in the room with this piece. So there was a lot of people that showed up, an incredible amount of people. And there was a seated moment here, and suddenly at the end, there was a questions and answer period. And these four guys stood up in the third or fourth row and said, "Hi, we're actually from the Ku Klux Klan, from such and such chapter." And the whole room went, whoa. You didn't know. First, they were outnumbered. So it was kind of like, is this gonna pop off? What's gonna happen here? Is everybody gonna jump these guys? Are these guys gonna pull out weapons? This is way before Trumpism. You have to remember that. So we were kind of like, oh boy, not expected. What's gonna happen? Do we get the cops? Because it would be just like this. There's no police presence in here, and we have these guys that are white supremacists. It was one of the most interesting film screenings I think I've ever been at, because it couldn't happen today, because it would have turned violent. It turned into a conversation. It turned into a conversation about otherness and difference and perception, and people listened to these four Klan members, and the Klan members actually listened to the anger and rage of all the people in the room. And it was just kind of fascinating on a human level to watch this group of people that were not set up in any way for this to happen, and it just occurred. So could it happen today? No, absolutely not. I think that, we're way too tribal for something like that to happen. I think that everybody's quick to jump and leap to the extremes, and nobody listens to each other in that kind of way. So that's a big difference between 30-something years ago and now.
Questions? People have questions. We have a microphone.
Congratulations on an amazing show. And I was just really looking at this painting behind you and wondering if there was an illusion and maybe a subversion of, first of all, the Stars and Stripes, and maybe Jasper Johns.
I didn't get the last part.
Jasper Johns. Possibly.
Jasper Johns. Wow, I didn't think about
Stars?
Jasper Johns. Well, yeah, I guess the stars. I think the stars come in and out. The stars come in and out of my work through over the years and have multiple layered meanings. That's one of the reasons why I continue to use them. I think that they're not pinned into one place. I mean, you have the single black star at the back of the room there, which, there's a lot of things that come up with the single black star. You think about Marcus Garvey, you think about the Black Star Line, you think about one individual shooting star. There's this layer, the black star as opposed to a series of white stars, and the burned out star flying across the sky. Stars for me represent so many things. I think there's a nostalgic piece to it. I think that there's, when we were children, we'd look at the beach, or at night. I used to go out at night to the beach, and that's where you'd see all the stars in the sky. And
But stars,
hopefully you'd see one.
stars in relation to this figure, who's also another recurring. This is Bosco.
Yeah.
So Bosco is an early Looney Tunes, racist caricature.
Absolutely.
And he's another recurring figure that you've looked at. How do you think about Bosco in relation then to a constellation of stars that are moving? Is that something you reflect on? Is this...
I think so. I mean, I think it's not accidental that he's walking through this star shower, with an umbrella. There's some hidden messaging in there someplace, and I think to your question about the painting itself there's a lot of layering that goes on with the paint, and they're a lot more about painting than they were about drawing and the actual surface and material.
Hi, I have a question. I guess it's kind of two-pronged.
Sure.
Number one, because you've spoken a lot about the clan and Marcus Garvey, when I see the crows, and your explanation of what they represent is so beautiful, but is there anything consciously or subconsciously in there about the tail end of the shadow cast by Jim Crow, just because it feels like it might be? And that's part one of my question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to take that first, because then I have like a second prong to that. You're speaking about erasure and the fact that you're trying to erase these stereotypes, but and you question that, is it just erasure? And that made me think that, as a painter, if you erase something, especially if there's something underneath that you want to get to what was the original, is there anything in that, in the erasure as well? Is it just getting rid of something, or is it so that you can reveal something?
I think it's definitely both. It's because I think that the surfaces are there's probably 8 or 10 different layers of paint on here, and it's a battle. Right. I assume you paint, because you talked about that in terms of painting. So it's a paint on and then scrape down, and an additive and a reduction at the same time. So it's almost this the physicality of it becomes very real for me. That's why the music becomes part of the narrative, in a sense, because sometimes it's violently scraped down. The background of the single star there is a lot more scrape. You can feel the scraping and the revealing. So there is a moment of reveal, and there's almost a moment of discovery. I think it's a bit of both. The crows, you hit it right on the head. I mean, there is that reference to Jim Crow as well. It's totally not lost. I'd like to hope that a lot of the work is like an onion. You're peeling away certain pieces, and the closer you get to the middle, you're just discovering other parts of this thing. It's not exactly what's on the surface. It's also what it implies and what it entails, and the histories behind those images, and why did he choose crows? Could it be a Jim Crow thing? Could it be, this relationship to Disney and speaking to that? Actually, I'll tell you something really quickly. I have a young daughter, and when she's not that young anymore, but when she was young, my wife put on Little Mermaid. I bring this up because they just redid Little Mermaid. So I got really angry and we got into this huge fight over Little Mermaid. And I said, I don't want her watching this trash. And she said, what are you talking about? This is like Little Mermaid. Like, she's 2. Like, what is she gonna get from that? I was like, I don't want that fucking movie in my house. And she's like, why are you so mad? And I said, because that film is all about this young girl giving up her voice in the service of some male. And my daughter is not gonna be raised with the idea of giving up her voice, her talent, her everything to chase some guy. And my wife was like, whoa, okay. We took the film out and then it went to the garbage. And I noticed that now, the new one, they took that scene out of the new one. They changed Little Mermaid, the race of Little Mermaid. So they erased her. So it's sort of a very interesting, Disney is very aware of their own history. So, that's why they tried to take the crows away.
On the topic about the crows, it's not on, but yeah, about the crows, I think about like a direct reference to Fritz the Cat. And I don't know if you've watched Fritz, but in the 70s and B2, I watched Fritz the Cat. What do you think about the crows? Fritz the Cat?
Wait, say that one.
She said, what do you think about the crows in Fritz the Cat?
Oh, in Fritz the Cat.
Yeah, so there's like a direct reference.
Oh, wow, I forgot about the Fritz the Cat crows. Wow.
Are the crows in Fritz the Cat, so what do you think about that?
I haven't seen Fritz the Cat in such a long time. I would be making up stories if I started to go into Fritz the Cat. I've seen Fritz the Cat, and
to the crows, and it just reminded me of this conversation. So yeah, just really
I honestly don't remember. I remember watching Fritz the Cat, and the importance of Fritz the Cat, because it when that adult cartoon came out, it had a lot of controversy around Fritz the Cat. Yeah. So I do remember it. It's not one that was, I would be lying if the direct reference to Fritz the Cat was there. No, I wasn't thinking about that. But I'm gonna go back and check that out though. Yeah. I remember liking Fritz the Cat. I thought that was really edgy and,
films are very controversial.
Yeah.
The challenge is there.
Yeah. I also mix up Fritz the Cat with what's the other cat? Cheshire Cat? Yeah, I always mix it because they both they're very different. But there is that like disappearance of the cat and the smile, and I always related that to kind of the racial jokes of smile, I can't see you in the dark kind of thing. Yeah.
One, I think, lady at the back, and I think that'll be our last question.
You were talking about the differences in the conceptual scene between New York and LA in the past. I was just wondering whether you think that's still the case in the contemporary moment.
That's a hard question to ask, to answer. Because I feel the same thing about a lot of creative production. And this is going to be the old man shaking the fist at the cloud thing. I think that one of the downsides of the internet has changed the ability to recognize things in local terms. I think things are far more general now. I think when we in the 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s, pre-Instagram and SoundCloud and all the rest of that, you had this way of understanding how music was coming out. For us in New York to get music coming out of, Brixton was an undertaking. Like, first of all, somebody had to travel to London. Then they had to have a tape. They had to bring it back, record the tape, pass it around. Like all of this. So you were lucky if you had that tape. A lot of it was myth, but I think artists and musicians were allowed periods of time for their work to kind of percolate for a while and become recognizable and anchor it to a location. So the idea of a LA artist had a certain kind of look to it, that kind of Mike Kelly. Interestingly enough, Mike Kelly's not originally from California, he's from Detroit, but he's identified so deeply with California school, or Stephen Prina, or all of the California artists like John Baldessari and so on. And then you had like New York, the New York school, and you could tell the New York painters, and you could tell the New York sculptors, and you could tell a New York band like Talking Heads, as opposed to,
He wasn't LA.
these guys they were from here, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think that was important, and I really become sad about that. Like, I think that now a young artist, as soon as they make a painting, as soon as they make a song, they upload it to the internet and get likes and clicks and things and responses from people around the world. So a painter that's painting the figure in London uploads something onto, Instagram or TikTok or whatever they use, and then somebody in California sees it, and now that becomes like a general kind of image style. And that's kind of unfortunate that you can't, locate production that way. Maybe cooking is the only thing that has stayed local. I don't know.
Okay, on the note of local versus not local. Global. That's the word. Please join me in thanking Gary Simmons this morning on the occasion of this extraordinary exhibition, This Must Be the Place. Thank you, Gary.